I'm in, so let me broadcast and I'll bring Steve in.
Okay.
Gotta find his office number.
Hi, Galen.
Hello.
Nick, you had an alias.
Yeah, Nick, you're showing is Steve Kleppen.
Ah, I just clicked on a link. That's odd. Let me try to dial back in. Hold on.
All right, you can rename your.
Rename. There we go. There we go. That'll
I
be
think
much
we
easier.
also know who's who here.
Okay, Mr. Pop and Mr. Martin, can I ask you to stop your video? When it's time for your presentation, we'll alert you so you can turn your video on. Thank you.
All right, you want me to call roll? Lou, I think we're having audio issues with Steve.
Okay,
All right, so I'll start. Mr. Schulman,
here.
Ms. Thomas,
Here.
Mr. Johnson,
Here.
Mr. Witherspoon,
Here.
Mr. Goldstein,
Here.
Ms. Wells,
Here.
Mr. Cantor,
Here.
and I think I got everyone who's here.
Okay, let me start with two quick announcements. I learned, I think it was yesterday, Steve told me that commissioners can only serve 9 years. Apparently, somewhere in local statutes, there's a limit. As a result, Nate is no longer a commissioner of the zoning commission. I frankly think that that's unfortunate, but that seems to be the regulation. Steve, I know that in the past we've recognized commissioners going off the commission. If you can prepare that perhaps for our next meeting or the meeting after, so that we can properly recognize Nate for everything he's done for the city. Secondly, Josh Goldstein has been made a full member of the commission and is no longer an alternate. That is good news. Okay, so with that, we have, there was a public hearing that we began at our last meeting and that we are going hopefully complete this evening. And that is 3-20 SP/1-20 CAM, 310 Wilson Avenue, web construction. We've received a lot of additional information, both from the staff and from Attorney Succi. I'd like to begin by asking the staff if there are any further comments that you want to share before we ask Attorney Succi to speak.
I just wanted to see if Steve's audio is going. Steve, is it working?
Can you hear me?
Yes,
Yeah.
we can.
Yes.
Sure. Yeah, Brian, why don't you start? I can chime in a little bit.
Yeah, so the one response quickly to Attorney Succi's memo back, I just have one quick comment to make, which was regarding the flood line on the map. Now, how I interpreted that survey being shown is that the property split between flood zone 13 and 11. In Attorney Succi's memo, she says that it's not in the flood zone. So I don't know if there's a discrepancy there in the survey or what's going on there. But that was just the one comment I made. And then what, Attorney Secchi?
Steve, were you going to say something now, or are you going to wait?
Yeah, I mean, you know, obviously there are some items that we don't agree with Attorney Secchi on, and we both Brian and I have the utmost respect for Attorney Secchi, but there are items we don't, wouldn't agree with the interpretation on. I mean, I references to litigation to me, you make the decision based on the items you've observed and the evidence in the record, and then come to the conclusion you feel is appropriate for the application. And if there's questions along the way, we're happy to address them.
Okay. Attorney Secchi?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the commission. I hope everyone is finally back to normal after last week's crazy weather. And thank you for holding this special meeting and on such short notice, given all that you have in front of you, not only tonight, but in upcoming weeks. When we were before you back on July 15th for the outset and the commencement of this public hearing, we got to the point where we presented to you what our proposal was. We heard from very limited members of the public. I believe Ms. Laura Cella was the only member of the public who spoke. There were various communications entered into the record from individuals who expressed support for the proposal. But on that July 15th and then subsequent to July 15th, we received a communication from the staff, which we've responded to in writing. We also met on the site the last week of July and discussed what our concerns, our position with Mr. Baker and with Mr. Kleppen. And as a result of not only that meeting, but reevaluation by Seymour and Associates, the survey was updated, the flood line was established, spot elevations were established, and we submit to you that's conclusive evidence of where the flood line is based upon evaluation by licensed land surveyors and other professionals. There are about 6 points or areas that seem to be remaining in contention. I just want to touch upon them briefly, and then I'll have Mr. Martin and Mr. Pop go into more detail, since those are the experts who were charged with evaluating those areas and providing you with analysis and reports with respect to those areas. The points that came up in the last meeting generally related to, again, the elevation info, and I think that we have adequately demonstrated by documentary evidence that with the new survey that the flood line is properly established and the elevations exist as shown on the map by Seymour Associates. As a result of that mapping, the area for the proposed storage of aggregate materials has been moved. It's another 50 feet northward, and it results in about 1,100 square feet less area due to the change in that flood line. And Dean Martin will go over that in more detail with you. There was a question when we were at the site and also in the initial memo by staff about the necessity for a 20-foot high fence. That's an outgrowth of two things. Number one, we thought it would be more appropriate to screen aggregate materials from view from individuals who live on Village Creek, but also my clients have experienced substantial damage to their vehicles and equipment on another site in Norwalk where the fence is limited to 8 feet in height. And it's just necessary to prevent further trespassing and damage on a site here that's tucked behind others that could be an area where this type of activity and this type of damage could be experienced again. We're willing to entertain something smaller than 20 feet, but something larger than 8 feet we think is necessary. The issue of historic fill that was raised, we find no evidence of historic fill in any of the records or documents in the city of Norwalk. I've spoken personally to Paul Sotnick of DPW, and that is the agency charged with excavation and fill permits. There was no information, no violation, no permit issued for this portion of this property that could be found. And I submit to you that had there been any issue, had there been any violation or concern, Public Works would not have issued its sign off on July 15th for the proposal in front of you, which they thoroughly reviewed. One of the issues that was raised last Friday related to salinity levels. And that is a new concern that was raised. And I have to again submit that it was not based upon any scientific evidence or evaluation. And I think that is necessary for you to conclude that that is an issue that this project may create. It's speculative, it's a concern, but it doesn't rise to the level of evidence upon which a denial or concern should be based. And in some instances, it has been demonstrated that increased salinity levels are beneficial, such as in controlling the invasives, such as Phragmites, that exist on the property right now. One of the other concerns that has been raised by staff is the contrast of how we deal with the existing road that has been on the property for more than 50 years. It's our contention that leaving it alone and replanting it so it naturally vegetates is less disruptive and more appropriate, considering the fact that it would be nearly 1.8 acres of land that would be left in its natural state and improved. We also take issue with the statement that a stormwater management plan should not be considered a benefit to this property or the surrounding area. While I understand that stormwater management plans are required with new construction, right now there's nothing on the site, and anything that drains from the site drains without any proper concern for volumes or water quality. So those were the issues that generally were raised in the initial July 15th memo, and then again on August 7th with a few additions. We've responded in writing with various case law and other documents that support our contention and set forth what we believe are the Commission's obligations, responsibilities, and limitations. And I think I'll leave that to all of you to read. But at this point, if you wouldn't mind, I'd like Mr. Martin to be brought live and have the video of him made live so he can discuss the changes to the site plan that were a result of the new mapping and the new information by Seymour surveyors. Would that be okay?
That would be fine, Mr. Martin. You can simply click on the stop video to restart the video. Ah, you've done it.
Yes, I'm here. Good evening.
Okay.
As mentioned, we did provide a revised site plan since the last hearing was held. Some of the changes that were provided were, again, transfer of actual topographic spot elevations and flood zone information taken off from the William Seymour survey. And in doing so, we realized that there was a good portion of the southern end of our material storage pile was in the 11.0, which is the 100-year flood elevation for this area. We were below that elevation, so we revised our stockpile area, pulled it to the north so that we have none of the storage area is going to be within that or below that elevation 11.0. As Attorney Suchi mentioned, that did reduce the material storage pile by, actually is about 1,600 square feet is what the reduction was. And again, the stormwater system, which we had previously provided, it will be maintained with a water quality trough along the southern and eastern sides of the material storage area, as well as stormwater retention at the northern end of the property. This, as I mentioned, or as was mentioned, currently this is just a flat dirt area, and so we are going to be providing a system which will intercept the water quality volume for the entire material storage area, as well as the increased runoff for the site. So I think that definitely is a benefit over what's located presently. I think those are the changes we provided. I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Okay. Questions from the commissioners?
Is it possible to see a copy of the revised plan on the screen?
Yeah, Brian, can you put that up, or do you want?
So Commissioner Johnson, if the plan that you're looking at right now, on the left side, there is a vertical line. Initially, the contractor storage material stockpile area had extended almost up to that line. And with the new FEMA flood lines that were established by Seymour and Associates, you can see that the edge of that stockpile area has been brought in generally where flag 13, wetland flag 13 is at the bottom of the screen. So it's been drawn back approximately 50 feet from where it was originally proposed.
Okay, I see. Okay, thank you.
Other questions regarding Mr. Martin's presentation? If not,
Mr. Martin, would you be kind enough to explain to the commission the interactions we had with John Goucher at DEP, which gave rise to the block wall and the additional surfacing northward of that wall as a result of conversations with Tom Little of DPW?
Yes. Mr. Goucher from the DEP. Originally, our plan had provided the 20-foot high concrete block wall completely surrounding the material storage area. And this was considered to be a structure not keeping with the coastal management requirements. And it was deemed that, by removing the wall and reducing and just adding a curbing along the perimeter of the material storage area with a fence would provide some sort of demarcation, if you will, between the vehicles that'll be passing through, bringing materials to and from the stockpile areas, as well as providing a demarcation for the property or for the edge of the area. And then in speaking with Tom Little, originally we were only providing stormwater retention on the northern end of the property where the paved area is. And per his request to provide more water quality volume for the entire site, we came up with a system consisting of a trough along the inside of the curbing, which will intercept all the runoff and get it back into the ground. And that again is sized. It's basically a trough of crushed stone lined by filter fabric. And that'll provide the storage of the water quality volume or the 1-inch rainfall for the entire material storage area.
Brian, can you bring up that drawing again, please?
Yep.
Mr. Martin, can you point out where that fence is going to go?
Yeah, I don't know if I have, there's the fence. It's going to be right on, what's right where the cursor is right now.
Mm-hmm.
To the inside is the block wall, is the block curbing. The fence will be immediately on the outside of the block curbing, and then alongside fence will be a plantings of arborvitaes. Those are the little round circles that you see. And then just on the outside of the arborvitaes is a siltation fence.
And what is on the other side of the storage? Is there curbing? Is that curbing I'm seeing?
On the western side is the block wall. On the western side of the storage area is a 20-foot high block wall. The curbing, the 8-inch curbing would be along the eastern side, adjacent or uphill from the marsh wetland area.
Mm-hmm.
And Mr.
With
Martin,
the fence.
where would the crushed stone be located? Is that again, I guess, northward of the block wall?
Yes, if you just scroll down right directly below the site plan, there's a detail which shows, and a little bit to the right, it shows a concrete curb detail and water storage area. And so the dark hatched area is underneath is the concrete store, or is the crushed stone storage. with a concrete block, which is mostly underground, buried underground. And then immediately to the left of the concrete block is the fence, with silt fence along the bottom portion of the fence on the inside.
I still have a question, and maybe Brian or Steve, you can chime in, but I know your original letter mentioned two aspects of the concrete blocks and fencing. One had to do with the risk of increased flooding, but it also had to do with the preventing the wetlands and marshes from naturally migrating because it's stuck between the body of water and development in the form of these blocks. And I know Attorney Suchi, and thank you for sending this morning. I didn't have time to really dig into it, but I saw the flooding addressed, but I didn't see anything addressing the migration.
Well, actually, we did respond to the question of migration. It is in my memorandum, and I think that if you'd be kind enough, as soon as Matt Popp of Environmental Land Solutions comes on, he'll be able to address that as well. But the area that's of concern with respect to the migration of those tidal areas, tidal wetlands, is beyond where the storage area is. It would be to the south of that. And it's the tidal marshlands are on either side of this roadway that's existed all this time. To the north of our proposed storage yard is the Meadow Street Partners, the old city carting site where they store storage containers for construction debris. There is no marshland on the north of us. It's located off our site to the south. And then if you were to travel southward on that drive aisle, however you want to classify it, there's some marshland on either side of that drive aisle. And it's off the screen to the left, but it's our position that's the salt, see the reference to salt marsh at the top? It's our position that it'd be more beneficial to this sensitive area that we leave alone that which exists today and disturb it simply with plantings rather than removing whatever that roadway is that exists that we don't know what's there. We don't know how long it would take to remove it, what would be involved in terms of permitting or design for both whatever hydrology issues may emerge. So the salt, I think the concern by the staff is that the salt marsh to the north and south of the area that we propose to remain in its natural state, that by our proposal, it limits the ability of that salt marsh to merge. And I think once Mr. Popp gets on the line, he'll be able to explain to you how that is problematic and uncertain a way of making that salt marsh expand. So I don't know if that answers your question, but that's where we were coming from.
Yeah, I just want to add one thing here. I don't know if you can hear me.
Yeah.
Yep.
Oh, okay. When you say you're going to let the roadway revert back to its natural state, well, that just means it's going to be overgrown. You're not letting the roadway revert back to its natural state because that would require you to remove the roadway. It's not a permeable surface as it currently exists. I think that's sort of a misunderstanding of the situation.
Commissioner Wells, it is somewhat permeable. What we meant by letting it revert is we're going to be planting it. And there is the proposal is to put a barrier at the edge of the material storage area so that no vehicles will be able to transverse that any longer. Well, so it would be able to become natural in terms of it just wouldn't be a travel way any longer. And
well, is that like if West Norwalk Road, which is right out in front of my house, if we just stopped using that and we put plantings on either side, it would be reverting to its natural state if nobody drove on it? Is that kind of what you're saying?
Well, but the difference is this isn't a paved roadway. It's gravelly, dirt-like, and there's a greater likelihood, at least in my opinion, but I'll leave it to our two experts to explain, a greater likelihood with the plantings we propose for it to revegetate itself over time. It's not a macadam or concrete roadway. It's compacted type surfacing. Dean, could you explain that a little better? And then Matt, when you come on, if you could explain what the concept is, I think that might answer Commissioner Wells' question.
Sure. Yeah, I think the concept is just to, it's not going to be back to the original, natural state before the roadway is installed, but obviously it'll be vegetated area. So it will provide some type of wildlife potential. No vehicle is going to be able to travel down through there. As was mentioned, there will be an obstruction at our south end of our material storage area. So I think the point is just to get it vegetated so that it can't be used as a traveled way.
What about the north end?
Hardly
Will you have something, a barrier to keep vehicles from using that road from the other end?
At the,
Well, currently, the access to the material storage area is a 50-foot right-of-way that exists today off Meadow Street. It's on the right side of the screen where the cursor is. That exists today. That provides access not only to my client and their building at 34 Meadow Street, which is an approved, fully functioning indoor rock crushing facility, but it also provides access to the city karting lot and also to two other users off that right-of-way. Those would be the only opportunities for anyone to come on this site. And as you'll see on the plan all the way to the right, the arborvitaes and the block continues around the southern side of the property and then around the northern vertical, just as it is on the southern vertical.
How will trucks that are coming in to load up on the materials, how are they going to gain access to the storage yard?
The vehicles would come into off the 50-foot right-of-way into the 34 Meadow Street site. They would load either materials there and then transport the excess. That's the purpose for this contractor's storage yard, to provide storage for excess. They would then come down the 50-foot right-of-way, however, what is that, about 100 feet? Come easterly, make a right, and then travel southerly to deposit the aggregates that have been created in those material storage bin areas. They would then back up and come back out of the material storage area and then travel northward through the material storage area, making a left back out onto the 50-foot right-of-way and either back into the 34 Meadow Street property or continuing on the 50-foot right-of-way and going out to Meadow Street.
I guess I'm not fully understanding it. How much of the gray area to the right, which is your rock crushing, indoor rock crushing operation, is actually building there?
Excuse me. The indoor rock crushing building is not on this site. It is to the right, and if you'll see, there's a dotted line, which I think Dean is describing now. That's the existing rock crushing building. The area we are proposing has no structure on it, has no building. It is just sectioned off areas for material storage. All of the processing takes place off this site on the adjacent site within that structure constructed a few years ago, for which all the requisite approvals were obtained. And then it's just the aggregate storage of excess on this site.
Okay. Questions from other commissioners?
I just want to chime in, and maybe this is something that, forgive me if we're sort of having to have the same kind of conversation over again. In reading your comments, Attorney Suchi, it seems that your issue with the concerns about salinity and a lot of the environmental-based concerns is that, frankly, that they're just, in your view, that just aren't within the jurisdiction of the Zoning Commission. Tell me, I guess, what I'm failing to understand, though, is, first of all, if you think this is an issue that's worth considering and exploring, and second, what you've done to address these issues just on the substance of the issues itself. Forget the jurisdictional issue for a second. I just want to see if there is an issue that's worth further exploration here, or if maybe this needs to be referred to a different committee to explore. If you're, I guess my question is sort of fill in the blank of like the validity of the staff's comments rather than just whether it's in the jurisdiction of the commission or not.
Okay, I think I can do it in one way, and then I'll have to defer to those who are who have better expertise and licensure than I do. But to allege that there's an increase in salinity without having any sort of evaluation is merely that. It's an allegation. And there aren't any requirements or regulations in the zoning regulations or any that I could find within the city code that provides for an obligation for us to evaluate salinity. Having said that, the materials that come out of this, that come out of the rock crushing facility are stone, and they're naturally occurring components with naturally occurring elements. I have no information, and I have, without a substantial study on what you're asking, I think it's well beyond the commission's discretion or jurisdiction to expect an applicant to provide that kind of analysis. Furthermore, no such analysis was ever provided for any of the other entities around us, so that would lead us to believe that this is not something we ever would have had to have considered. I haven't found any reference to the need to evaluate salinity, and without evidence or analysis that contradicts our position, I guess we all are a bit of a conundrum here. However, I don't think that a commission can impose conditions about salinity or consider that an application is inappropriate without some sort of documentary evidence or scientific evidence that points us to an issue that we don't believe exists. Perhaps Mr. Martin and Mr. Pop, when they come back on, can give more scientific background and analysis to your and answer to your question.
But I just want to point out too, from your memo, you say that we do have a right to consider the conservation of wetlands, watercourses, and other ecologically viable lands. Now, salinity, excess salinity is one of the elements. It doesn't specify salinity, but it doesn't specify arsenic either. It doesn't specify anything. It just says that, and we can consider the conservation of wetlands, watercourses, and other ecologically viable land. So I guess I sort of don't see the point with that.
Well, you do have a conservation commission that is charged with protecting and protecting wetlands and watercourses, and is charged with evaluating applications that are presented to it. And your conservation commission reviewed the application and approved the application. So in my opinion, I submit to you that that is evidence of protection of the watercourses and ecologically sensitive areas surrounding this property. And there's been no other evidence, analysis, or reports that contradict any of the information and analyses that our experts have provided as part of this application to either you or the Conservation Commission. Mr. Pop, if it would be okay, could you possibly come on and provide your opinion and your analysis of what we propose to do in the 1.8 acres to remain, and what your position is relative to the impact on tidal marshlands, and how it either helps or hinders, and the question of salinity?
Good evening, Matthew Pop, landscape architect.
I'm so sorry to interrupt, but Brian, is there anything we can do about all this background noise? It's hard to hear.
Other than just having people mute when they're not speaking, probably not.
Again, Matthew Pop. The project is a disturbed site, and we're proposing to place storage materials on this disturbed site. All of it is above elevation 11. There's no direct impact or indirect impact to the existing tidal wetlands that I found. Bordering the tidal wetlands is a perimeter of Phragmites, as Liz was noting. That's an invasive non-native species. There was some comment made regarding salinity, and I think if the salinity from the site ran off the site into the tidal wetlands, that would actually help decrease the Phragmites, which are sensitive to high concentrations of salt. We are proposing 8,500 square feet of restored habitat area. That's not including the additional area that we will do from shortening the storage yard that Dean noted. As we're not restoring the habitat to a tidal wetlands, we're restoring it to be a woodland with evergreen trees. We're proposing a planting of 38 evergreen trees. Most of them are native. That's not including the 68 green giant arborvitaes, which are wrapped around the site for screening purposes. We're also proposing planting of oak trees and seeding the area with a native seed mix. That area will be kept in the unmaintained state. It won't be manicured. It'll be great for wildlife habitat. Currently, it's just an existing road that's used by people from the site. There's dumping on there too. So in my opinion, this will not have an adverse impact to the tidal wetlands, this project. We'll have some water quality benefits and a wildlife habitat would be enhanced. Mainly we're using evergreen trees because evergreen trees along the coast are good for wintering owls and sheltering wildlife. So that's usually why we use evergreen trees along that coastline. So again, I don't see any adverse impact to the tidal wetlands from the project. If there's any questions, I'll be happy to answer them.
And the migration issue?
I wasn't clear on that migration issue because right now the tidal wetlands are elevation maybe 5.5, 6. We're working at elevation 11. So for the tidal wetlands, for this project to stop the migration of tidal wetlands, the tidal wetlands would have to, raise up, 5 feet in height. So I don't see that happening. So it wasn't.
I was going to ask it differently. How long would that take? I mean, is that 300 years? Is that 10 years? Is it?
If I had to guess, 5 feet, 1,000 years. So if I had, again, but if it was at elevation 11, we would have much bigger problems on our hands. So.
And I do have one other question, but I'm not sure who it's for, but Attorney Suchi, you just raised the Conservation Commission. And in my experience with all volunteer commissions, right, sometimes things slip through the cracks. So did the Conservation Commission see these comments from our commission staff and sign off on those?
No, the Conservation Commission is, as you know, a separate agency, and it is required by statute to render an opinion and render a decision prior to this to the Zoning Commission acting. But the plans and reports that were provided to the Zoning Commission were the same that were provided to the Conservation Commission up to the time that they rendered their decision. However, I will call to your attention the fact that the Senior Environmental Officer, Alexis Carachetti, was at the site when we met with Mr. Kleppen and Mr. Baker about 2 weeks ago. And I'm fairly confident that they're all in the same office, that they've shared information and shared concerns. But in general answer to your question, no, the most recent iteration was not provided to Ms. Carachetti because her commission had already acted. However, the issues relative to the Conservation Commission relate to inland wetlands and watercourses, not tidal wetlands and the tidal marshland area.
Comments from any of the other commissioners? If not, any further comments from the staff? Brian or Steve?
Yeah, one thing, the salinity issue comes up under the Connecticut general statutes for the coastal area management, where the commission is supposed to look for what are the adverse impacts and if they've been mitigated. So under the definition of adverse impacts on coastal resources, it looks at whether the impacts of pH or salinity can possibly be affected. So that's where that issue had come up.
I have a couple comments, Lou, too, and a couple of the commissioners had mentioned this, but I think it's a little misleading to say returning it to its natural state, because its natural state is not a berm that was created 50, 60, 70 years ago, whenever it was created. That's an artificial element that was added there. So while planting it and making it inaccessible to vehicular traffic is better than the current state, it's not the natural state. And while I think you could argue that if you remove that roadway, it would be more disruptive in the short term to the, the ecosystem there. And, obviously if you're doing construction and having machines in there, there's the possibility for erosion or short-term impacts that could result from that. In the longer run, hopefully that would return to its natural state. I was looking at an aerial picture of that site, and it's pretty clear that that road is at one elevation, and to the either side of the road are much lower elevations where the tidal wetlands are. Another point that I can't conclusively prove it, but I think it's highly likely at one time, or probably several times in the past, that area where the applicant's proposing to locate the majority of the yard was filled slightly. There were aerial pictures that we saw that showed piles of material there. So I'm sure there were times where there was a pile of material dumped there for whatever reason, and the easiest thing to do was just to spread it out and get rid of it that way. I don't think there was any ill intent to do anything beyond that, but they were just probably all right, get rid of this pile, spread it around, and the natural elevation increased. If you look at the map that Brian had pulled up before, which shows the site plan with the elevations, it's clear that the elevations on either side of the subject area are lower. So it's at one point in time it probably was filled, and whether DPW approved it or not, or regulated it or not, is a different matter. I mean, they're going to respond to a complaint or an application that's in front of them. So if there was a pile spread here or there over time, they may not know about it or may not have had any jurisdiction over it at that time. Just a quick point, and then I'll wrap up, is inland wetlands is not looking at the coastal wetlands. They're looking at the other wetlands part. So while they did render a decision on the matter in front of them, they don't have jurisdiction on all portions of this application.
If I may, with due respect to Mr. Kleppen, we can certainly agree to disagree. But I have to submit to you that this commission, while we recognize can impose reasonable conditions, the question is what's reasonable. Is it reasonable for a commission to look at an historic access way that my client nor its predecessor created and expect that that access way should be removed as a reasonable condition to the development of less than a half acre of the northern side of the property, when taken into account that 1.8 acres is going to be left alone. Perhaps the phraseology was incorrect, but it is going to be left as is. It's going to be planted, and whatever can emerge from that by virtue of it being left alone and not traveled upon is certainly better, I would think, than disrupting it and not knowing what we're going to get ourselves into or what the city is going to get itself into when we start looking at removing the road, what's underneath the road, what the hydrology is, whether or not that hydrology can sustain the type of merger of the tidal marshland on either side. I just think that kind of condition is well beyond a reasonable condition that the commission can impose. And it certainly there's so much uncertainty with what may or may not happen and what may or may not exist right now that I think that's tremendously problematic. And I don't think that would be, I submit to you that that's not something that would likely be sustainable if it's a condition of approval. My client, I think, would be willing to, and we've shared this, would be willing to take a look, see what's out there, and try to get a handle on what the design constraints, the analysis constraints, and cost constraints would be. To see if what the staff has proposed is at all viable. But frankly, I just think there are too many unknowns and it's too speculative at this point for us to be able to say that we would do that and we can do it. I don't even know if the permitting process with DEP would be something that would be successful in the final analysis. I think it's just, there are so many unknowns coupled with the fact that we're doing, I think, better than what what could be done, and certainly better than what exists today, that any such condition that would demand that we do more would be one that would be deemed unreasonable.
Any,
Yeah,
go ahead.
I would just add, obviously reasonableness is something that's only determined after the fact in a court of law. And so I don't think it's an issue for us to raise it. I think to Commissioner Wells's statement, I think it does fall within our purview. I, for one, would like to always err on the side of trying to do the right thing for Mother Nature to help her along and find out if it's possible. And I may then determine it's not reasonable, but I think out of hand, I would not make that determination as an individual.
I just want to echo what Commissioner Thomas said. The one thing I'm looking at, and the jurisdictional issues aside, it seems to me, and Attorney Suchi, tell me if I'm wrong, that the objection to the staff comments is that you just think that it's not within the jurisdiction to ask them, so therefore the concern shouldn't be answered. I'm really just trying to see if you're, and if the engineering and scientific experts present here today can sort of speak to this. I just want to know whether these are considered valid concerns and whether there has been work to investigate them, and if you've corresponded with other agencies. I just want to lay out for the record what's actually been done here to work with staff to figure out whether these are concerns that are that needed to be investigated. I don't want to get into a jurisdictional fight, and that's a legal fight that can happen later. I just want for the record to see what essentially so everyone and the public at large can know whether these environmental concerns have actually been looked into and what the resolution has been, or to the best of your abilities.
I will defer in just a minute to Mr. Martin or Mr. Pop, but I have to admit, we just heard about the salinity question on Friday. So there's not much we can do about investigating salinity and the impact of what we're doing in terms of salinity in 4 days.
That's okay, that's fair.
The other comment is, and I think we explained it, that it's very difficult and very costly to make a pronouncement as to whether or not removing a road that's been there that we had nothing to do with, if that one is going to be possible, how it's going to happen, and what the end result will be, if it'll be the result that everyone would like it to be, and what the cost is involved. And I just think that, and while I understand Commissioner Thomas's comment, I do believe that you do have to be concerned about what conditions you can and what reasonableness you have to bring to bear to an approval or a denial. And I think something like this goes beyond the concept of reasonableness. We've proposed to you something that our experts who put their licensure in front of you have indicated is appropriate and is beneficial. We have not received anything contrary or that would dispute those positions. So I submit to you that this is probably the better of a situation that without anything, it's going to remain as is, and there will be nothing to improve what has existed all this time. We are more than willing to consider additional, if more robust planting is more appropriate. Anything that would be something that would be a reasonable addition to what we proposed. But removing a road that I don't even know how much square footage, cubic yards of the road would have to be removed in order to achieve what the staff would like. It's just so unknown that I don't think anyone sitting in this room could say, well, you should do that. It wasn't anything that had to be considered for the city carting application. It was nothing that had to be considered for the Grasso application to the south when the violations were cured. So we're working with what happens around us and what kind of anticipated conditions and improvements are we going to be expected to implement. And I think that's what we did in light of what has happened around us and what we think are the best management practices and the type of development that's appropriate for this site.
Well, why not make an attempt to get answers to those questions? Do some exploration, take a look at the road, see what the material is, try and determine what the costs might be. and come back to us with that information.
And what if that, Mr. Schulman, what if that takes us 6 months to do? What if we come back and we find that it's a multi-million-dollar project? Is that then reasonable? I mean, I think we're doing the best we can given the land that we have to work with, and the attention that has not been paid to this portion of the property for many, many years. I don't know what else, absent what the staff is suggesting, would satisfy staff's concerns. I think we're doing the best to be cognizant of the conditions that exist and the environmental protections that all would like to see generated by this project. May I ask, Mr. Martin, by any chance, would you have any way of calculating or guesstimating what might be involved to, one, determine the design scope to remove a road? And Mr. Pop, the concept of salinity, can you lend any further shed any further light on this for the commissioners?
Well, certainly we can take a look at, on a topographic maps and see, you can kind of get a rough idea of the material that might have to be removed to get down to, the level of the salt marsh on either side of the roadway. Something like that could be done to give you a pure volume and possibly a rough cost associated with that type of removal.
Matt Pop, salinity, with tidal wetlands is usually only a concern if you're diluting, reducing salinity, where you're going to be infecting the tidal wetland vegetation, and again, promoting Phragmites, invasive, non-native invasive species. This site, we're not increasing any additional runoff, so I don't see that as being a problem. As far as removing that roadway, I'm not sure if that would have any impact of flooding on the west side of that roadway. It may by removing that, so that would have to be looked at too. And when we refer to something as a natural state, to me that means it's like unmaintained, not manicured. It doesn't mean that it's restored back to the original condition it was, hundreds of years ago or 100 years ago. So again, a natural state to me is something that is vegetated with native plants left. There may be some maintenance on to remove invasive species and stuff like that. So I think we have a difference of opinion on what natural state is.
Well, it seems to me we have three options here. We have a resolution to approve this application. We have a resolution to deny the application. And there is at least the option, if the developer is willing, to at least take a look at what it might cost to remove the roadway. Comments on those three options?
I think it also should be noted, however, that it's not simply the cost to remove. There's also additional permitting that I'm not certain we would be successful in attaining from DEP. It's not just as simple as just pull up the roadway. And I don't know to what extent design analysis and other, whether it's hydrology analyses or other things, will be brought to bear in order to get to the point where we have a plan in mind, or a plan that you would like to remove the road, and then we have to go to DEP. I'm not confident that DEP would look favorably upon what is being suggested. I just don't know. Then that's an unknown, and that's a cost factor and a time factor that it's anyone's best guess. We had suggested, and perhaps this is something the commission may want to consider, that, but I don't know, I don't want to put words in staff's mouth, and I just don't think that this is something that staff is agreeable to, that if you're inclined to approve, you certainly can make a condition that the onus then becomes on us to start evaluating this. And that's a condition that we could accept. And we would do that. We could come back to you and report back to you as to what we've discovered, what the process is, what the timing is, what the elements are that that would be necessary for us to move forward, and what the obstacles are. And those obstacles may very well be cost, and they very well may be permitting. But it's just unfortunate that what we thought was the benefit to this property, and something that would eliminate use of this property that has been unfettered by trucks and other vehicles without any protection to the tidal wetlands on either side or the watercourse. We thought it was a better option to close it off and let it revegetate with some assistance from us, and not disturb it any further because of the unintended consequences of further disruption and that might be created. But it is your decision, but we are willing to consider whatever other conditions might be appropriate. And if that is for us to further evaluate and return to you with what we've uncovered, I suspect that would be something that we could live with.
Final comments from staff?
Just one quick point, I will address that. It's still a continuation of a public hearing, so I don't know if there's anybody in the audience participating that would like to speak to that. But I don't know, I don't necessarily see the value in that exercise. I think that would, to me, that's just kind of spinning our tires, personally. Just my 2 cents.
One other option you may want to consider is you could keep the hearing open for the limited purpose of us doing whatever we could short term to try to evaluate what the design and analysis would be for us to give you some further information on whether it be salinity or this migration of those wetland areas. It's just another option that you may want to consider.
Okay. Brian, do you want to open it up to the public?
Sure. So if anyone in the public would like to speak, you can use the raise your hand function, or you can dial *9. Seeing no one?
Oh, you want to make the offer one more time?
So again, use the raise your hand function if you'd like to speak on the application, or if you're on a telephone, if you use the *9. Nope.
Okay. Commissioners, comments? Motion?
Well, maybe we should leave it open and give them, I don't know some time. I mean, we could decide about how much time, but to go and do the investigation about the salinity as well as the cost factor of removing the road.
Can I just ask, where did the salinity thing stem from? It sounded like staff raised it last week or earlier this week on sort of like, what was what prompted that raise?
So initial comments went to the applicant in the form of a memo, and then we, last week, we sent a more detailed one. So as part of the Connecticut General Statutes for coastal area management, the zoning commission, when getting a CAM application, is supposed to look for what are the adverse and beneficial impacts of the application. And it is included as part of the application process. The applicant should identify beneficial and adverse impacts of the proposed use. So listed as the definition for adverse impacts on coastal resources, it mentions, large changes that could come up to pH, to salinity, to oxidation, kind of those kind of things.
Can that be explored reasonably? Who could come to a conclusion about the salinity issue?
That's my question right as well, Rod.
Mike, excuse me, my guess would be, since we test the materials that are processed next door on a monthly basis, I'm presuming, and you'll have to forgive me, I'm not a scientist, I'm not an engineer, I would think that there would be some availability by the testing company to give us some information on whether or not the aggregate material produces sodium or other chemicals that would impact, naturally occurring chemicals that would impact salinity. It's just something that perhaps we can do, and that might be able to be done more quickly, at least to answer this question.
And Liz, how much more time do you think it would take to get some preliminary information together regarding both issues?
Chairman Schulman, it's a little hard to say, but if there's a concern by the commission about us running out of time statutorily with respect to this application, I don't think we have any issues, largely because we've only, I think, used one extension, and then through the executive orders by the governor, there's an additional 90 days at the end. So I think we're well within time frames. My guess is that we would need probably a month, maybe less, but that's my guess.
And Steve, do you have our schedule for September?
Not that pinpointed. I mean, it's going to be very busy. So, you may have to end up holding a special meeting. I'm thinking because I think there's just too much volume.
Okay. Is the commission satisfied with holding this hearing open for additional information?
Yeah, I am. I am very loath to approve it at this point. And if we hold it open, it gives us additional opportunity to consider.
Okay, Galen, do you want to make that in the form of a motion?
I agree with Commissioner Wells as well.
Okay. Galen, is that a motion?
Yes, so I'll move that we hold this matter open.
Second.
Okay, and Mr. Goldstein seconds. Steve, you want to do a roll call, or Brian do a roll call?
Sure, I can
On the
do
motion?
that. Yes, in favor of the motion, Ms. Thomas,
Yes.
Mr. Johnson,
Yes.
Mr. Witherspoon,
Yes.
Ms. Wells,
Yes.
Mr. Schulman,
Yes.
Mr. Goldstein,
Yes.
and Mr. Cantor.
I'm going to abstain.
Okay, sounds like the ayes have it. Therefore, I won't apologize for asking if there are any comments on the motion, as I should have done. Liz, if you would, you'll work out a date with Steve that works for you and works for us.
Of course. Be happy
Okay.
to. Thank you.
Thank you. Next item is review and action on pending applications. The first being 9-18 SPR / number 18-18 CAM, Play Connecticut LLC. This is a continuing conversation regarding whether this is a minor change or whether we want to put this into a public hearing. And this is all about the intersection, I believe, of axe throwing, alcohol, and children.
Well, are we to the point where the commission discusses how they feel about it, or?
I think so. I can tell you frankly that I looked into the rules and regulations of several of the venues in the state. Frankly, I was not willing to test my health by going to any of the venues. One of the venues limits the number of, serves only beer and wine to people who are throwing axes, and limits their intake to 2 drinks. Another limits the age at which people can throw axes to a minimum of 14 years. But other than that, they were sort of all over the place in terms of what they permitted. nothing. Some allowed children, some didn't allow children because even though they served alcohol, they were not considered bars. Many of them, I don't know about all because they didn't all disclose, but many of them have what they call an instructor or a monitor at each one of the throwing units to make sure that safety issues are followed. Anyone else do any research?
Well, I received several phone calls after, our last meeting was discussed in Nancy on Norwalk, and people said they had gone to axe throwing venues and they were very safe and they actually had a really good time. And it occurred to me that the insurer for this facility would probably require certain kind of regulation, that safety regulations that would make it, I don't think they could get insurance for a place where you're throwing axes, serving hard liquor, and have little kids there at the same time. The little kids' activities are more likely to take place at a different time than the axe throwing. Is that the case, Ms. Suchi?
Mr. Chairman and Commissioners, if I may, two things. Bill Diamond is on the line, and he would be the operator of this facility. So I think it'd be helpful for him to explain how a similar facility he operates, how it operates, how they control people, how they control the mixture of alcohol and axe throwing, and the safety and security and insurance measures. But just so that you know, this portion of this entertainment venue is segregated from where the small kids would be in that Sparkalicious party venue. It's not open, that the lanes are in the middle of the room. They're segregated out. The lanes have dividers between them. And there are all sorts of safety protocols that were described in the documents we provided to you. But I think it'd be helpful for Mr. Diamond if you could allow him to participate. He runs a facility, and he could answer all the questions you have and give you a better sense of how they work, how they function, what concerns he has, and how he deals with those. Would that be okay?
Absolutely. Mr. Diamond, would you like to press your stop video in order to open your video line?
I actually don't have video on right now, but I do because I'm on my cell phone. Is it okay if I just talk?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Please do.
So we have about 20 entertainment companies across a number of different states. So this is not our first venue or rodeo, so to speak, when it comes to this type of stuff. We operate we're primarily a real estate company, but our entertainment division, like I said, has a number of different venues, all in like the go-karting, bowling, arcade, ropes course, laser tag. And recently we've rolled axe throwing out to 5 or 6 different venues. And I know it seems like, because believe me, when I first heard about axe throwing a few years ago, I had the same reaction, like, what, this is crazy. And then I started seeing these venues pop up all over the country, and there's probably hundreds, if not over 1,000 venues around the country that are doing axe throwing. It's one of the hot new categories in this sort of out-of-home entertainment space. There's whole franchise companies selling franchises for axe throwing. And again, I think, when you first think about it, I'm sure everyone's mind goes to darts, and they think that it's just like darts where you're standing in a bar and you're throwing a dart at a target on a wall and someone could walk by and get brained if the axe is, but in actuality, this is really, really safe. And I would argue that axe throwing is actually safer than our bowling centers. I mean, if we have more injuries on bowling than probably any other activity we do, but axe throwing, each lane is walled off or fenced off from each other. There's barriers on 5 sides, all around the axe throwing and even on the roof. It's not the type of thing where you're just given an axe and you just start throwing, chucking it at a wall. There's an axe marshal in every 2, 3, or 4 lanes, and everybody throws, even though everybody's all walled off from each other, everybody throws the axe together. And then the axe marshal waits till everyone's thrown in and he says, okay, everybody go collect their axe. And you go get your axe. And typically you get 3 throws and then it's the next person's turn. You leave the closed off lane and the next group of people come in and throw the axe. Again, the axe marshal, no one picks up the axe until the axe marshal says it. Everybody throws at the same time. Everybody exits the lanes at the same time. And again, all the lanes are separated. The big thing about this is, you're there typically with a big group and everyone's having a lot of fun. So there's, you're there with a group of 3, 4, 5, 10 people and, they're watching you throw the axe. So that's part of the fun. And, but again, when everyone's throwing, they're in an enclosed area, not walled off. Typically it's a combination of wood and fencing. So, cause the whole thing is a spectator. You want to see your colleagues throw the axe. So that's kind of it. So it's really a very, very controlled activity that takes place inside the entertainment venue.
I think I think the concern I heard most strongly at our last meeting was the potential for any interaction between children and the axe throwing venue.
Well, again, when you're throwing the axe, you're in a completely secure area. So, a mom may be walking by with a kid as they go to the bathroom or something, but there's no way for the axe to get out of the secure area. So, I mean, I'm trying to, we operate these in probably 6 different locations at the moment. And again, a lot of times we set these up so they're right next to the arcade. So people are watching people throw axes, but it's what it's very similar to? Imagine a batting cage. Imagine when you're at a batting cage, you go inside this caged area and there's a high velocity baseball shooting at you as you hit it. Now your friends and other kids and et cetera may be standing outside the batting cage, but they're not at any risk of getting hit by a baseball, right? And even unlike those, we have an axe marshal. No one's throwing an axe unsupervised.
Well, let's open it up to the other commissioners.
Sorry. Just one thing to mention that this entire entertainment venue is about 29,000 square feet with multiple different types of activities. This portion of it is approximately 1,200 square feet. And they're very, the lanes are segregated. They have the dividers, and as Mr. Diamond has indicated, individuals just don't, like a bowling ball, you get your bowling ball and you go ahead and bowl. There are individuals, employees who accompany those who are throwing the axes for that very safety purpose and to make sure that everyone is participating in accordance with the rules and regulations of the venue. I would also mention to you that in connection with the concern raised about service of alcohol and at an axe throwing venue, there are 3 venues in Connecticut that have liquor permits. And I did check, there have been no reports of issues raised by local police departments or issues raised to the Department of Consumer Protection Liquor Division about these venues and the fact that they have a liquor permit. That those are not out there. Those are not issues that have been brought to bear.
I would actually argue that, or make the point that probably almost every axe thrown venue in the country has a liquor license. I mean, it goes because these are social events that companies go to, parties, like you get it's your 40th birthday party, rather than book it at a restaurant. People like to do activities so that it'll be my 40th birthday party. Let's have an axe throwing party. So, I mean, every axe throwing venue, has a liquor license. This is kind of like, I'm sure when go-karts first came out and they were trying to get planning board approval for go-karts, people were probably arguing, what are you, crazy? People are going to be racing around on high-speed go-karts around a track. I mean, people are going to crash and get injured, and and this is no different than a lot of other things,
Commissioners, what's your pleasure?
I'm prepared to consider this to be a minor change because, I mean, we recognize that this was an amusement center. We recognize that alcohol was going to be serve there. It's just a change of the mix of events. So I'm prepared to say it's a minor change.
Okay,
I
so
agree with Ron.
Mr. Johnson has made the motion. Mr. Cantor has seconded. Any further discussion? All those in favor, let's do a roll call.
Sure. Ms. Thomas?
Yes.
Mr. Johnson?
Yes.
Mr. Witherspoon?
Yes.
Ms. Wells?
Yes.
Mr. Schulman?
Yes.
Mr. Cantor?
Yes.
And Mr. Goldstein?
Yes.
Okay. We look forward to joining you when the venue opens.
I'll be there. Thanks, guys.
Perhaps we can celebrate Mr. Sumter's departure and he can throw the first ceremonial axe. I'm going to miss Mr. Sumter on the commission. He was a valuable member.
I think we all are.
Absolutely.
Next item is 13-16 SP, Maine Norwalk LLC, and that is the village. I believe we have already permitted one, this is a request for a one-year extension. I believe we've already authorized one extension due to the lawsuit that was brought. Attorney Suchi, can you explain the request for this second extension?
Sure, you're absolutely right. Just so that you know, the approval was granted in 2017. There was a trial court case. It was then a petition for certification to the appellate court, which was denied. That appellate appeal concluded in September 2018. We sought the first extension in 2019 to bring us to 2020. In the interim, during this past few months, my client has had construction drawings prepared. They've gotten District 3 ConDOT office approval for the roadway improvements. And as we were moving forward and gaining speed, COVID hit. So we're in the midst of re-ramping up to get back to where we were. Financing seems to be almost finalized. So the approval would expire in September. And while there may be a chance that we could get everything back in line and post the bond with DOT, and that's necessary in order to secure a building permit and zoning permit, an additional bit of time would be very, very helpful.
Any questions for Attorney Suchi? All right, if not, can I have a motion to approve a one-year extension?
So move.
Michael Witherspoon, second. Joshua Goldstein, second.
Yep.
Okay, again, let's do a roll call.
Sure. Mr. Johnson?
No.
Mr. Witherspoon?
Yes.
Ms. Wells?
Yes.
Mr. Schulman?
Yes.
Mr. Cantor?
I'm going to abstain from here.
Mr. Goldstein?
Yes.
And Ms. Thomas?
Yes.
Okay.
511.
The motion passes.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Review and action on new applications. And these are the three: Merritt Station Norwalk LLC, Glover Avenue, and 2 Oakwood Avenue. Proposed change to the zoning map, proposed amendments to amend the definition of development park, and site plan review of proposed master plan. And we'll turn it over to Attorney Waters and his team.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For the record, David Waters, representing the applicants here. There's a couple of things that we'd like to present to you this evening. We have submitted to your staff some sections and some perspectives in the way of a three-dimensional model viewing from different directions what the project site would look like. So we thought that we would walk you through that. In addition to that, we do also have attending the meeting tonight, Dr. Don Poland from Bowman and York, who was our consultant that has done the economic analysis in case you have questions of him. Did not plan on having him do a presentation, but felt that there had been some questions he has responded to in writing, which have been submitted. His responses have been submitted to you, but he's also available so that if people wish to ask questions at this point, you can respond to them, and otherwise we'll have him also available at the public hearing. Similarly, Andrew White from Tig & Bond is here. He's our civil engineer, and if there are questions that the commission has, he would be available to respond to those too. But I know that the initial piece should be to look at the plans that we've submitted, because I think that really was the thing that people were focused on the last time we were in attendance. So if you don't mind, I'm going to share my screen. All of the things that we are providing to you visually tonight are things that are already submitted to you and are up on the city's website. So just to refresh your recollection, this is the massing plan of the project that we are talking about. And starting down at the southern end at the intersection of Glover and Oakwood, we start with an 11-story building that drops down to a 5-story building at the square, which is right where the new train station will be. Just as an update on that, the state has awarded the contract for construction of the train station, and they intend to commence construction very shortly. This within the next couple of months, my understanding is. So you have a 5-story that is here, the square. You have another 5-story that is in this location. Then as you proceed north, there is an 11-story building here. And again, the 11 stories includes the retail that is at the base of the building, plus a couple of layers of parking. Proceeding north from there are 2 additional buildings that are built on top of parking. These are proposed to be 14-story buildings. And then at the very northern end of the site are 2 additional buildings, which would be a total of 15 stories, again, including the layers of parking as well. So with that in mind, what we did was we asked the architects from Spiegel's to provide some sections through the site so that you would be able to see what the relationship is between the height of our proposed buildings and the other improvements in the area. And in doing that, so the first study is shown here, and what you're looking at, this is building 1.1, which goes to here, and it's an that's the 11-story building. So there's a section that runs through the garage, through the 11-story building, through the condominium buildings that are to the west, and it actually runs also down to the plaza at Merit 7. The second section, which is also on the same page, you'll just see in a minute, is through the 5-story building and also through the condominiums that are just to the west of it, and it goes through building 501. So when you look at that, what you see, that first one, which went through the garage and the 11-story building, you'll see that the garage is actually below the buildings that are on this side. They actually, and this is your 11-story building in front. Now, the interesting thing is that if you go back to where that section was, it came in and just kind of skimmed 501. If we had taken that section through here and brought it through 501, then you would have had the same height that you have here, not just the plaza, but the height as well. And that height is actually about 5 feet higher than this 11-story building. And you might say, well, how is that possible? This is 11 stories. This is 8 stories on top of a plaza. But because this is a residential building, the floor to ceiling is less for residential than it would be for your classic Class A office building. So in fact, the 501 is taller than building 1.1. And again, if you ran a line across from here, from the top of this building across, you would get to the top of basically the 6th story of the building here. So that tells you that this is kind of sitting in a low spot, and you can see the land as it rises as you move to the west. Similarly, you can see here that this is the 5-story section that is by the square. It's virtually the same, and in fact, from this spot, even if you were at the ground level looking up, this building would still be lower than and would not block. You'd still see the top of 501 from the ground at this location. So it fits very nicely within that. We then proceed north, and this is a section that will run through building 2.1, which is the 11-story building. And there's another section that is done.
David, you're starting to break up a little bit.
Oh, sorry.
That's
So
better
this,
already.
all right, so this is the section that runs through 2.1, which is an 11-story building. And there's a section that we also had them do through building 2.2, which is a 14-story building. We didn't have them do 2.3 because it's basically the same analysis. There's nothing up in this area. So in this particular case, when you see 2.1, you have 301 Merit 7 on this side. You have basically the first 6 stories on this side are about the same height as the 2 stories over here because of the significant rise in topography that occurs here. Now, one of the things that we could do, and we've suggested is an alternative that the commission can look at, is in lieu of having this building, this 11-story building here at this end of things, we would be willing to also move that over to this end of the building. So where here you saw it's kind of a C-shaped building that's 11 stories tall, we could do it and flip it so that it becomes this way. It brings more of a presence of the building to Glover Avenue, but it does then provide some relief in this area to the residential in this location to the west. So that's a possibility if the commission feels that that's appropriate. We suggested it this way because we felt that it was better for the streetscape, but it certainly could go either direction. With the other section that we did, this is through the 14-story building. The thing that's important about this, first of all, this is 201 Merit 7, and you can see that basically where you end up with is that the first, it's the height of 201 Merit 7 hits at just about the top of the 11th story of this building. So you're talking about 3 additional stories above what the height is at 201. What's also interesting here is that the property to the west rises up, and this is all DOT property, and then it falls back down to get to Route 7. If you are driving along on Route 7, if there was no vegetation whatsoever here, you would still not see this building because the sight line is such, and you can do it with a straight rule, but basically from here, just scraping the top of the mole at that point and going up, it is above the building. So you do not see the building at all. And you'll see what that means in a visual sense in just a minute when we get to the perspectives. The other part to it is that the knoll itself, if you were to just come across this way, is about 7 stories up the building. So it tells you how much of an increase in height actually occurs as the land climbs to the west as you're going in this direction. The last set of sections that we did, we ran through building 3.1 and building 3.2. And you'll recall that both of these are the 15-story buildings as proposed. And again, what we did was we ran it through 101 Merit 7, through Grist Mill. This is building B. And we actually, you'll see that in the section, what we did was we had them do a jog, because if we had done it right here, you wouldn't have Grist Mill at all. So we wanted to, again, get the scope of it. So we did a jog in the section, and it goes through Grist Mill B now, even though it does not in reality. So what you have is, this is the relationship between the Grist Mill B, 101 Merit 7, which is taller, and 3.1 and 3.2. Again, the thing that's important to note here is that the way that this has been designed, the building is over to the farther west location where it has less impact on the street and the streetscape and the visual nature of things. So that Glover Avenue is actually left with not being in a canyon per se of a 15-story building here, and then your 5 stories on this side. So that is the sections that we provided. If I can then move on, what we did was we then asked a different consultant who does modeling to provide us with basically models and 3D sections of the entire project. So here you have the buildings again that are shown in block. And we also include in block all of the other surrounding buildings that are either the ones that are up the hill on the west. These are all the Merit 7 buildings. This is the curb, which was originally known as Grist Mill Village. And what you're seeing here in these numbers is where the following perspectives that are part of the study were shown from. So when you see a 1, that means that view number 1 is looking from this location, looking in this direction. We also added and asked them to include a photo, one of the aerial photos of the area, because it's important to kind of put some of this in context. First of all, to note that there's an extensive amount of vegetation that is not on our property, but is part of the Route 7 right-of-way. So all of the area that's up here, all of the vegetation that is along here, none of that is on our property, but all of it is part of the right-of-way, and therefore one can presume will be retained. And that becomes important as you then see some of the existing vegetation on these perspectives as they'll be presented. Similarly, over on this side, there is some area that potentially could be developed. Bert Phelps has once again put up a sign saying that there's a small area here that is available for development, but it's a very narrow area, and it's not likely that there will be any significant development there. If there was, it would further block the rest of our development here. But there is landscaping in the way of natural vegetation that exists here as well. And lastly, you'll note that we did not take any perspectives from along Main Avenue south of number 5. And you may say, why didn't you? And that's because all of the Merit 7 buildings, in fact, block anything that you would see further to the west on Glover Avenue. So with that, These buildings, again, are done as blocks. They almost look like office buildings with a glass curtain wall, because again, they haven't been designed yet. And so what you're looking at is buildings that have no color, no architectural features. They're purely so that you can understand what the mass is of these buildings as it relates to the surroundings. What we also did was we asked them to put, and you'll see there's a little orange line, dotted line that's here. That is, in this case, what you're looking at is building 3.2, 3.1, and down here is 2.3. And in each case, this shows what an 11-story building would look like, which is what would be permitted as of now under the current regulations for a commercial plan residential development. 11 stories would be permitted. What we've asked for is to go up an additional 4 stories in this location and this location, and an additional 3 stories in this location. And we'll explain a little bit how that actually makes some sense in a minute. That being said, what you're seeing here is that northernmost building followed by the building immediately behind it. All of these, again, are the existing vegetation along the Route 7 expressway. What you don't see is not only architectural features, but you don't see any additional landscaping that is being proposed and that obviously would be part of a site plan that was then part of a further approval that the commission would be required to review. The second view, this is looking from, this is Grist Mill right here, and this is the top of Glover right here. So what you're seeing here, this is again 3.2, the northernmost building. What you're seeing here is 3.1, which is the second building down. And then this little piece right here is 2.2. So that's the 14-story building that is the northernmost of the two 14-story buildings. But you really don't see anything of it already. Forget about any further landscaping that is done. And you really don't see anything of 3.1. You certainly will see some of 3.2 because that is the northernmost, and this is kind of that nose that kind of sticks out there. But that gives you an idea of what you're actually going to see as a result.
And that's what we'll see during summer and springtime when the leaves are up first.
No question. No question.
Fall and winter.
There would be a difference in that. What you're seeing is just the what we have from Google Earth that we were able to use. The next one is looking from the expressway. And what you're seeing here, again, you're seeing this is 3.2 and 3.1. What you see here, or don't see here currently, is 2.3, the 14-story building. And if you remember back to those sections, you can understand one of the reasons that you don't see very much is because there is a significant rise in the topography in this location, and then you've got things on top of it as well. But even without the things on top of it, it sits behind that knoll that we were talking about. Down here, what you have, this is 2.2, which is again the second of the 14-story buildings. And then what you have down here is 2.1, which is that 11-story building that's kind of the C-shaped building that can be flipped one way or the other. And then finally, what you have right down here is 1.2, which is the 5-story building. This is, again, from the expressway traveling north. This is from further south on the expressway, but traveling north. What you see here, this is 2.3, which again is the 14-story building. This is 2.2, which is also a 14-story building. What you see here in front of it, these darker brown or grayish buildings, those are the residential buildings, the condominium buildings that are to the west of the Glover Avenue project. So all of these things that you see here, 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 those are all existing buildings, and frankly, even when you drive past them today, including during the winter, you don't see very much of them at all. They're not particularly visible. This here is, again, 2.1, which is an 11-story building. This is the view that you would see from Main Avenue. So, and it's a bit confusing because what you're looking at here is both Grist Mill Village, the curb, and the buildings behind it, which would be the new buildings. So what you have over here, this is actually the location where the Sinclair gas station is at the very north end of Merritt 7. And 101 would be literally right off the picture. What you see here, this is 3.2, which is the 15-story building. And it's behind, if you draw this line right here, this is building B of the curb. So the only thing that you're actually seeing of this 15-story building is this piece right here. Similarly, this is 3.1, and what you see behind the curb is this piece of that 15-story building. Then down here, there is the top of 2.3, and here is the top of 2.2. So that's what you would see. This is building A of the curb. This is building B of the curb. So you're only seeing the tops of those four buildings. This was taken from the flybridge that brings you across from where 399 Main Avenue and the towers access Main Avenue. And you've passed 399 and you're now on the bridge going over to the plaza level at the towers. So you're well above street level and you're looking north. So the interesting thing that what you see here is, first of all, this is the 11-story building that is 1.1. Down in this location, you're going to, it's hard to see because it's not really lined particularly well. But this is your 5-story building that is 1.2. What you then see beyond that is 2.2, which is up here. And then this is 3.1, which is the 15-story building at the far end of things. And the reason that you see that where you do is because Glover Avenue comes up and then curves around. And the way that it curves, it actually, you will be able to see 3.1 at the end of things. What's somewhat interesting to note on this is that this 11-story building and the buildings that of Merritt 7, as well as 399, are very much in sync with each other as far as height is concerned. This next one is not really a photo, but is completely modeled. And the reason why is because none of it, with the exception of the Merritt 7 buildings, currently exists. This is taken showing the new train station with the pedestrian overpass over the train tracks. But it gives you an ability to look at the scale of that and of the Merritt 7 buildings with the 5-story building that is here and here. And you can also see then this is the beginning of the square where the retail is. So this area down here at the base of this building will be retail. This area along here on this building will also be retail. And then you have the square as well. But it gives you an opportunity to see the relationship height-wise between this, which is about 2.5 stories, this, which is 5 stories, and Merit 7, which is at about 8 stories at that point. And the last of the perspectives is actually taken from Glover looking south. And this is the curved building A right over here. So this is actually real at this point. These are buildings 2.3 and 2.2, both of which are proposed to be 14-story buildings. You can see what you would see as you're driving down. We have added some landscaping that would be typical on the top of, in that above the garage area. This is where a lot of the amenity space would be located, but that's the only greenery that we've added to this site and to this shot. The thing that's interesting about this is that it demonstrates why we think that going to 14 stories in this location would be better than 11 stories. And again, the height that you see here, the additional 3 stories, visually is negligible in the scheme of things. But what it does do is it allows this to be open. If you look at what we had proposed as the alternatives, so again, going back to as we have proposed it, what you're looking at right now is this view that comes through between these 2 buildings. And you see some of this, you see both of the towers, and they're both 14 stories. If you look at the alternative, which was the design that had the same density, but now they're 11-story buildings, what you have is 2 buildings that certainly are acceptable. I mean, they provide the same kind of usage and the same density, and they're at 11 stories, so they would comply with your height and story requirements. But it closes off this area. So we believe that, again, what you see here, for the trade-off of those 3 additional stories in each case, is that instead of having building that this wall would, the building would actually extend out to about here, and this building would then extend backwards to about there. So instead of having that open space between the 2, we would end up seeing much more building. It would be somewhat lower, but it would be a lot bigger building visually than by creating the taller but narrower buildings that we've proposed. So that kind of goes through the presentation that we had as far as the perspectives were concerned, but we did want to be able to walk you through them. As I said, beyond that, we do have Dr. Poland is available if you have questions of him on the economics. And if there's others that, and also Andrew is available on the civil end of things.
Steve, I'm sorry, David.
Yeah.
Before we go any further, you may remember the first time that you showed us this, my response was that this is both terrific and terrifying. And I am still, at the moment, more terrified about the project. And the reason is that it seems to me its success is predicated on 4 or 5 different transportation improvements that need to take place on and around Glover Avenue. Which makes me very uncomfortable taking any action until we know what the impact of those projects will be. Because in my view, this project, as it currently stands, without those improvements, does not work. because there are only essentially two means of egress and exit for the project. And I think we need to take a look at those transportation projects before we consider going to public hearing or approving anything here. Because if it's possible that even with those projects that the project doesn't work, then what is the point, number one? Number two, many of these projects are not scheduled for implementation until 2024. So we're looking at 4 years from now for those projects even beginning. So why approve them right now? And again, you know, given the state's economic condition between principally because of COVID, are these going to get pushed back further still as they have in the past? So I think we need to bring in a transportation consultant. Steve has prepared an RFP for a transportation consultant to take a hard look at this. But I mean, I'd like to hear what the other commissioners feel about this.
Lou, can I break apart what you said for a second? Because I just want to make sure I'm tracking about what we're actually talking about tonight versus what we're not. If I'm following the conversation over the past, I guess what's been a couple of months at this point, there's a couple of things on the table of the text amendment to allow for a master plan for this area, which includes map changes and whatnot. If that gets approved, it is my understanding that every building still would require approval from this commission. Is that accurate, Steve?
Yes.
So in effect, I just want to clarify, David, maybe you can help too here, because it's in part and parcel, Lou, with the traffic study. But from your side, David, what's the benefit of the master plan approval versus going building by building?
David, you're muted. Still muted. There you go.
Better? Okay.
Yeah.
So a couple of reasons. One of them is that, frankly, to address the Commissioner Schulman's point about the what's the urgency with the state, frankly, it's a chicken and egg situation. That if the state knows that there is a development that now needs to be addressed, then this becomes a higher priority from them than it does to just leave things at the status quo. Frankly, at this point, does the intersection work? Sometimes it does, sometimes less likely and less well. But there's nothing that's compelling to anybody at this point to say we really need to change anything about it. If there's now a development that is going to generate, that is going to support the economy of Norwalk and of the region, and that is going to actually require them to focus on this, then it means that this has a greater priority from their perspective as well. And it's something that can be pushed down from the state, from higher in the state to the DOT to be able to address. I assure you that we are in contact with DOT and that we've been working with them for that very reason, because it makes no sense to us, as you point out, to get an approval that we then can't get any further approvals on because we can't meet the stable traffic flow requirements for any of the future buildings. So that's part of it. The second part is that it really is important to be able to show the big picture, so that way, when this is designed and there is an actual game plan for improvements to be made to this entire area from a transportation standpoint, they can actually take into account what the actual demand is going to be. Right now, if DOT was to design something that was to address the current intersection at Grist Mill, they would not know what the future demand is on Glover. And it might be sufficient and it might not be sufficient. But by creating a master plan where everybody says, okay, now we know what is likely to occur there, there's a greater sense of certainty as to what you need to design for. So those are the things that we're talking about.
And David, are there other benefits for the master plan in your perspective?
There certainly are. I mean, the master plan as a whole, I think, anytime that this commission and the planning commission can look at a whole area and say, okay, we now know how to work on the whole area, and so that we can deal with things on an integrated basis rather than an ad hoc basis. That's a positive. As we've said that, and I pointed out a couple of meetings ago, there's a lot of, we're proposing 20% of public open space, not just open space that's available to the people that live or occupy those properties, but to the city as a whole. You don't get that when it's a commercial PRD. Each one is an individual application. And part of the reason you don't get that is because the developer is not likely to invest a lot of money into things that are helpful to the public, but not overly helpful to themselves, if they don't know that they're going to get the rest of the things that they need in order to make it a successful project.
So you're saying, if I'm saying back to you, what I'm hearing is you're saying because of the scale that you can effectively lock in or notionally lock in via a master plan, barring every site will be, approved in an one by one basis. That gives enough confidence, or at least indicates to, BLT and you all like, okay, now we want to invest more in this area, and the efficiencies that come with that and the scale makes sense to do so.
That's
okay,
exactly right.
Okay, great. That's really helpful.
Yeah, and nonetheless, if we do approve the master plan and you come to us to build the first building and there has been no traffic improvement, we can deny that approval of that.
Yeah, absolutely. If we cannot demonstrate, just as we have to with every special permit or site plan review application, if we can't demonstrate that we are maintaining stable traffic flow, then that is one of the standards that we would not meet. You would deny the application. It may be that, if it's building 1.2, which is the smaller 5-story building, maybe you could build that because it doesn't generate a significant amount of traffic. But if it's, 3.2, which is, a 15-story building, then almost certainly you would not be able to do anything until you can address the traffic as well.
And how much, and I mean, this is Steve, more for question more for Steve and Brian, or maybe David too as well, as how much switching can occur in the sense of there's already an agreed amount of what could be built today, right, within the zoning regulations without special permits, et cetera, et cetera. Let's say, you go forward with all this goes through nicely, master plan gets approved, but, all those additional floors are just not going to work. You're not going to be able to meet the additional standards. Could BLT still develop each of those properties separately within the current zoning laws without commission approval?
No.
Yeah.
The way that we have proposed the language for this master plan is that if you have approved the master plan, then any property within that master plan area must comply with the master plan as the commission might amend it in the future.
Gotcha.
So
However, if we don't approve the master plan, you can go develop each of those properties to the standards as they are today.
Correct.
Which could completely...
Nick, are nowhere near what they're proposing.
Okay.
I heard of it's AAA residential.
Gotcha.
You can't,
Although I will point out that that there is a fairly significant area that's up at the north end where we were proposing the 15-story buildings that is already executive office zone. So some of it is certainly is AAA residential, and some of it is business too, which would not allow you to go up to 11 stories right now. But certainly the point is that if the master plan is approved, then every application for that master plan area is measured against the yardstick of the approved master plan. If it doesn't meet the master plan, then you would have the basis for denying it at that point. Now, we've designed this with flexibility in mind so that if an Amazon came in and said, we'd love to have an office building rather than a residential building, that we would then come back for an amendment to the master plan and we would propose an office building. Or if Hilton came in and said we wanted to have a Class A hotel at the north end of right up by Grist Mill, we could amend the master plan to change 3.2 into a hotel instead. So that's the kind of thing that we could do. But it's to provide for the maximum parameters. What's the maximum development, height, density, types of uses, things like that.
Steve, what would be the timing for the transportation study?
I think they indicated a couple of weeks. Would you mind if I commented on a couple things that were just stated?
Not at all. Go ahead.
Sure. I was previously writing down notes and questions because everybody was kind of almost getting at what I was wondering about myself is, so on many of those parcels that they're proposing to redevelop, not everyone was fully occupied, but there was some use and activity on those sites before, and they did generate some level of traffic. So that the preliminary traffic report that was put together indicated several intersections with a level of service F. So what I'm kind of, and I don't have an answer to this, so I'm going to try to find an answer to this, and maybe Attorney Waters has knowledge on this that he could share, is if he proposed anything there that showed there would be an increase in traffic, regardless of whether you approve the master plan or not, would you be able to deny that application because the traffic was so bad since there's no longer a use on that site? I mean, is that a taking? That's a pretty, I haven't run through that scenario before, so I'd like to get a little more information on that.
Yeah, I mean, from my thought, first of all, I think that you'd have to be careful. Certainly, this commission has had a number of applications recently for properties up on Oakwood and what have you. If you took it to the truly draconian position that you have a couple of Fs, and so therefore 2 extra cars would be a problem and therefore a basis for denial, then theoretically you can't approve anything on Oakwood or Steer Hill or on Glover Avenue. So, and I certainly would think that it would not be appropriate for, some of the more recent approvals that have occurred on Oakwood, that they would be now burdened with having to try and figure out what to do with the traffic situation in that area. But that being said, remember also that it's not just this commission that will have a say in whether we can move forward with any of the proposed development, but also this all has to go through OSTA. And the state is definitely involved in all of this. It is a major traffic generator, and it's right off of Route 7, and so therefore it has impact on the intersections of Route 7. So therefore, it's not just a question of whether we could get it by you, but as a practical matter, it also has to go through the state. And if the state doesn't agree that we can add any traffic to these intersections, it doesn't go anywhere either.
Yeah, and my only other kind of concern, which staff had put into the last memo, was that, if you approve the amendments and then whatever the master plan's final shape is, you're kind of pointing at that this is an acceptable development in the community, and sort of in fact are not approving the individual traffic for the sites, but are indicating that this is an area that can handle that traffic. So we have to be concerned that you're opening that door.
You know,
Well, is it an indicator that we're saying that it could handle the traffic, or is it an indicator that we'd say we'd want that area to be able to handle said traffic?
That's a good question.
It's a bit of the chicken, and that's when I go back to the chicken and the egg comment that
That's a very
David
good
started.
question. That's a very good point.
And Lou raised as well as from my perspective, the traffic is a huge thing, but I don't see us actually moving the ball without some sort of partnership and some sort of impetus. And I don't see the state have not acted for years with the traffic being what it is. So while it is a big factor for me, it's not the only factor for this sort of project. I see it as like putting the pressure is an important thing as well.
Well, Steve, given the time frame, there's absolutely no reason not to go forward with the transportation study. We'll have the results perhaps by our next meeting, if not the meeting after that, but very quickly. And that will give us some additional information. I mean, I'd also like to hear from the DOT. I mean, I'd like to get the commissioner down here for a conversation regarding this project. This is a big enough and important enough project so that we, if you will, ought to hear it from the horse's mouth.
Exactly.
I
Exactly.
will reach out again about that. When I had talked to them previously, not the commissioner, but you know, folks on the management end of this, they had indicated a reluctance to speak at these kind of venues. They had some reasons, which were their reasons.
Well,
I kind of lost my thought a little
perhaps
bit.
Attorney Waters can help us there.
we can certainly try. That's not a problem.
Yeah, and I can speak to the mayor too and see if he can perhaps reach out and see.
We've all said this before. We would like to see development and even substantial development along Glover Avenue. We're not opposed to development, although, you know, I have lots of questions about your design and so forth. But those are things we can work out. But if we can't get people into and out of the site, that's a disaster for everyone.
No, Commissioner Schulman, we're absolutely on the same page on that. And frankly, we are even more concerned about it because of the fact that we have our existing tenants like FactSet that have to be able to get in and out of Glover Avenue as well. So we're completely in alignment on the fact that traffic needs to be addressed. We think that this project actually creates the impetus to do that. And it's important that it be addressed because it's an important piece of the puzzle and it's an important piece of Norwalk.
Yeah. And I'm sure on the political side of this, you guys are much more sophisticated than any one of us, and that's why your assistance is very much welcome.
Yep, absolutely. Well, whatever we can do to help push that along, we will be happy to do.
But I would like to have some more information before we consider moving it to a public hearing. I don't want to hold this up endlessly, but I don't think that a delay of weeks or even a month is going to be critical, so long as we don't run the clock out.
Right, and we've granted you the extensions. We certainly understand that this is a big project. It's an important project. We feel good about it, but we also know that you need to feel good about it in order to approve it. So we get that.
Dave, can we confirm that you're okay if we bring on board the traffic portion of the peer review at this stage?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay.
Any other questions or comments?
And I just want to make sure, so where we are in the process is still open amongst ourselves for conversations, awaiting the traffic review. At that point, it'll go to the public hearing. The public hearing is going to be focused primarily on the text amendment, as well as the approval of this particular project. They sort of go hand in hand. I just want to make sure we're talking about all the different components as we need to talk through them. So like if folks had questions about the actual text amendment and the changes, the specifics of that, is now the time for that, or do we want to wait for our next conversation or send questions over to Steve? And because there's some question marks within that as well.
I think I'd like to wait, but feel free to send your comments to Steve or your questions.
Great.
And then Steve, I'd ask that, you know, you share the questions and your responses with all of us.
So yeah, we can definitely do that. The memo that we put together last time kind of addressed I was trying to get the conversation as focused as we can to, you know, move this through the process, because as we indicated, it still has to go through public hearing. So
Right.
there were several items in there. Obviously, we talked about the map amendment and the text amendment. I think we're, you know, that for the most part, the text amendment, the applicant and staff, there's some smaller points of disagreement, but for the bulk of the structure is there. The map amendment, where staff thinks is appropriate, it's just a question of approval now, or do we, based on the traffic concerns, what do you go with? And then the last piece of it was they had submitted a site plan application. Staff had recommended that be withdrawn, and then a special permit application be submitted to handle the master plan component itself. So that would, you know, that in and of itself kicks the clock down the road a little bit. I mean, you can act on the text amendment and the map change independent of those, but I mean, to me, unless Dave tell me if you feel differently, that it's probably easier to handle it as a bundle versus each item separately.
Steve, I think that, you know, first of all, just for the efficiency of the commission, it would be better to be able to handle all the applications at the same time, so you don't have to have multiple hearings and what have you. So we get that. Frankly, all of the information that we would be providing for a special permit application as opposed to a site plan review application for a master plan is going to be the same information. It's just withdrawing one and filing it again with a different name. So I don't see a problem with that.
So Steve, things in your memo, I'm looking at like paragraph 2 about requiring a minimum open space, public accessibility, green infrastructure, things of that nature. Are those, I know there's some question marks in there, are those pretty much you and Dave on the same page of those things, or are those still open items at this point?
I think there's some small things in there that are not totally agreed to, but I think, to me, those kind of details will get worked out in the hearing, and then you as a commission have to decide what you want as requirements. And then if you feel, no, this is important, we want that, then that's got to get worked into the final language. I wouldn't be as concerned about those points at this time. I think it would be good, I mean, and Attorney Waters will tell me differently otherwise, if you know, like things about the overall mass of the buildings, are you concerned about that, or are you, you know, the 15 stories is a pretty tall structure for Norwalk in general. Is that something you're okay with? The DiCarlo and Dahl report had recommended changes about road realignment or moving buildings in a certain direction to optimize more green space that could be open to the public and make for a larger footprint that way. So some of those are the bigger details that need to get into the master plan component. So my bigger question back to you at the moment is, if you don't schedule a public hearing at this date, when we come back and do this one more time, what are we looking to accomplish at that next meeting before we schedule the public hearing?
Well, I'm hoping we get some information from the transportation study, and hopefully have someone from CONDOT we can discuss it with, someone who has at some level of significant authority to discuss it with.
And I do have a couple of points, but I think I would be better served going through your memo of August 4th, sending those questions, because it's possible they could be resolved very quickly before a public hearing as well.
Okay, so it's possible that I can confirm tomorrow with the peer review folks if they can have something done by the 16th. I don't think August 3rd, where are we? September 3rd is
reasonable.
realistic. So
Right.
yeah, let me look at my calendar, make sure I got the right dates. Yeah, so September 3rd, and then I think it might be the 22nd or 23rd. So I have to look at that. And that's the question if you want to target around those dates.
The 16th is what's on the calendar right now.
All right. Yeah, so it's probably the 16th. So let me see if that's feasible for the consultant. If they can turn it around on the 16th, then we can target that to put the application back up.
Okay.
And Steve, how I'm holding the DeCarlo and Dole peer review comments is effectively put out there into the ether, but Dave, I'm holding how I read the response memo being you'll deal with those at a later point in time, not really going to do much with that at this point in time, because that gets to the nitty gritty of full design and whatnot, where we're, where buildings may end up and how they're fully looking. Like everything we're seeing is really just a placeholder of what a conceptual building could be. It could be very different once we get down to those details. Is that right?
Yeah, that is absolutely right. There are a couple of things that they suggested. One of them was a realignment of the roadway, which there's a practical problem and a philosophical issue with, which is that the practical problem is that we have a long-term tenant at 129 Glover. So the ability to move the roadway, which requires removal of the existing building, is going to be put off for a while, because that's really kind of one of the last pieces that we would expect to be done in this project. But the other part, as a philosophical issue, is one of the things that we're trying to do is we're trying to create Glover Avenue as an area where people feel safe and comfortable to walk along the street and what have you. And we're a little afraid that if you realign the road to get rid of the S-bend in it, that you're now going to essentially encourage speeding. So that we understand what the thought is behind it. We also have some thoughts about it. We certainly have also looked at their other suggestion, which is that you make the building that's at that location into kind of a signature building, so that it becomes kind of the barbell of activity. And so again, we're certainly thinking that through as well. And that kind of goes more to the point, Commissioner Cantor, of when do you design these buildings as real buildings? So it's not an unusual or unreasonable request to think about that as a way to do that. And to enhance that area around Raccoon Brook and the green space that's in front, and to create it into a real big area as opposed to a fractured area.
Well, I think that's a big issue. One of the things I see when I look at your proposal is I don't feel there's enough green space. And so to the extent that you can respond to that sooner rather than later, it would be helpful to me. And if realigning the street is something, it's an item that's closed to you, looking at other opportunities for opening up green space, I think would enhance the project.
One thing I'd like to see, this is relatively small, but is that square that you have, that's a public space, where that really needs to be bigger to be really what you intend it to be, I think.
Right.
That goes, yeah. I mean, that goes to my issue too, Galen.
Yeah.
That we I think for it to be successful, there needs to be more green space.
The only thing I would.
Go ahead, Josh, sorry.
Oh, the only thing I wanted to add, and I don't know if Dr. Poland is still on the call.
He is.
But regarding the economics, and this is something that also we can deal with later, I noticed on, and I think it's page, the bottom of page 3 on the response memo from August 4th, you know, there seems to be a discussion about the loss of commercial space to residential use, but what it really seems to be is sort of a discussion of, you know, the effects of the pandemic and trends in utilization of office space and how office space is going to be used, you know, for the future. I remember when this was first presented, there was a rather substantial economic model that provided, you know, it was very comprehensive, but it was done sort of pre-COVID. And I think maybe a refresher and with knowledge in mind that there are trends that are rapidly changing, and I realize you can't predict the future, but it is to say that the economic expectations, or at least the projections that you've given the people at this point, probably aren't going to work out. So I think a renewed look at your economic figures, or at least some, you know, updated projections here, I think may help things.
Just to be clear on that, the original economic projections from the actual study produced is what you're asking about.
So in the original Gorham and York, I believe it's the original Gorham and York presentation, essentially presentation that was provided to us, included, if I'm not mistaken, a series of economic calculations having everything to do with tax benefits and property tax revenue, real estate revenue that were based on pre-COVID trends and pre-COVID projections. My question is, as considering we're making a decision that could have implications in the future, and by the way, this isn't the last pandemic that'll ever happen, I just think it's worth discussing you know, just taking a refreshed look at those projections and maybe giving us a little more maneuvering room here. You know, I'm not an economist. I'm not exactly sure if what I'm saying, if, you know, if you take a hard look at it and if there's anything that changes in your projections, I just think a renewed look at this, I think is warranted here.
Okay, I just wanted to clarify what it was you were asking, and we can definitely do that. So thank you.
I mean, I hope any of the commissioners can let me know if I'm off base here. But
Commissioner Goldstein, I would just point out that actually you're spot on, that we're already seeing some of the trends in some of this as far as our office buildings and residential buildings are concerned. One prime example of that is the fact that typically with Class A office buildings, you know, everybody wants their own beautiful conference room. What we're now seeing is that most people now don't want a conference room in their space. They want a conference room right off of the main lobby of the building so that people don't come up into their space. So that's a whole new world on some of these things. And similarly in the residential buildings, people are now looking at it and saying, if I'm going to be working from home, I want to be able to have live workspace in my building that I can use, which we've got in the curb, and it's being used quite remarkably. But it's the same type of thing that, you know, things are changing and they will continue to change.
Thank you.
Okay. It sounds as if we have a way to go forward.
Mr. Chairman, may I make one point?
Sure.
So we had talked about this previously, and staff would strongly recommend that as part of the final master plan that there are well-developed design guidelines that are, you know, it's almost a second phase of the peer review that DiCarlo and Dahl is undertaking. So it's kind of like a hybrid form-based code where we're kind of outlining what we want to see in these buildings. It's not, you know, designing each building, because each one will be a separate application down the road, but it's kind of laying out the standards of what we want in terms of the, you know, the design of the building, could be materials, the landscape, lighting, all those kind of things. I think I can pull that out of a previous memo that we had put together.
Okay. Does that mean we move forward with phase 2 of their work?
I think that's what we have. I think as the special permit application is submitted, that's when we have to, firm up the commitment and the pricing from DeCarlo and Dahl in that second phase. And, I can work with the applicant offline on the scope of that to make sure that they're comfortable and present that back to the commission and get them started on that. That could, we've already taken several months with this, and I imagine that part of it itself could add a couple of months to it. Sorry, Dave, but that it ultimately to get the project right. I think if that's the end goal, then I would recommend that course.
Okay.
That's fine. We're happy to work with you guys.
All right. Anything else from anyone on this? Right. If not, we'll close it out and kind of go into our own business.
All right. Well, thank you again, commissioners, for all of your time and effort on this, and we'll see you shortly.
Good. Look forward to it. Steve, next we have a couple of updates from you.
Sure. The first item is just an update on the East Norwalk TOD. We've had to cancel the last 2 public hearings because of this confounded storm. We've rescheduled it to, the first hearing is next Tuesday, the 18th, and I think we're targeting the 24th of the second hearing. So that's going to move through the process and is also scheduled with the Planning Committee of Council, so it's moving forward. The next item is the industrial zone study. We should be having a meeting fairly shortly. I'm going to circle back with the consultant team later this week because they were looking for a date, but I haven't heard from them in a week or so. So I'm going to circle back with them to see when the initial kickoff meeting and that process will get started. And then the last one that's a direct of mine is the zoning regulation RFP, which I sent out a revised version of that this afternoon. I apologize, it went out late. Most of the language was what you've seen before, but there was the yellow highlighted text. And if you want, I could pull that up if that's helpful.
I think it would be. And let me explain that I had provided Steve with some language and he wanted some further input. So he pulled Stephanie in to the conversation, and Stephanie provided additional language as well. And Steve has done his best to include most of that language in this current version.
Are you seeing the document? Because I can't tell.
Yes.
No, I'm seeing an agenda.
Yeah.
Oh,
All right, that's not what I wanted. All right, hold on one sec.
These are the same old.
I thought you did a great job, Steve, in capturing what I was trying to convey. So thank you.
Okay, sure. If I could find it. My biggest problem at work is I usually have like 40 windows open, and it's not
I think I
letting me.
mentioned this to you before. What we need in your position is a 16-year-old who knows how to use the computer.
Well, if you ask my wife, she would tell you that you got the 16-year-old. Let me see if I can find it here. Oh, I think I got it. All right, how's that?
That's it.
Yes.
Okay. Let me scroll up to the beginning and just show you where we made some recommended changes. So I added this item in because I had mentioned this previously, and it speaks to the TOD item. There have been a couple questions about, not to get into East Norwalk too much, but there were questions about the viability of the parking in that area because the lots are smaller, they're not very deep. So someone had raised a question about, I don't think you'll be able to park these projects. So, and there was also a couple questions about the amenity schedule that we've proposed. So I thought that, you know, the budget for the whole project is $200,000. I think we'll come in under that based on the analysis that we've already done. So I'd like to carve out about $5,000 at the most, I think is all that is needed, to have whatever consulting firm we choose take a look at those regulations quickly and verify what's there and then make some suggestions. And I think that can happen while you're starting your own review of those regulations, and, you know, at the time maybe we start the public hearing process. I think that's probably a, you know, a belts and suspenders move to move the process forward. Okay, and the next set of items talks about the DBE requirements, and talking, you know, a little bit of on the social justice end, I guess, is how we're looking at that and trying to implement it and seeing if there's a way we can include it. So this, what you're seeing now is talking about, you know, having the firm or firms address or provide us with information on how they deal with these types of issues, how
Steve,
they
I'm
implement
sorry,
it in their firm.
I caught this, what I think is a mistake before, but I forgot to tell you about it. That second line, I think diversification should be diversity. That's it. Yeah, I think that should just be diversity. Sorry, that's the English major in me.
That's fine. I know, I'm fine if everybody else is fine with that.
Yeah, I'm fine with that.
Okay. And what we're trying to really get out of them is, you know, a couple things. So, you know, it's very possible that there will be firms that, you know, don't have the you know, capability in-house for this or meet the requirement in-house for this, so they'll have to partner with someone. So what we're going to try to do is get out of them is, how have you worked together before? If not, then how do you see this partnership going forward? How do you see the workload being split up and those kind of things? Just to get a sense of how they're going to handle it and make sure it's not just, I guess, like a token offering to score some points in the final criteria. Okay. And this next bullet point is a little bit deeper into that, which will be a requirement that as one of the submittal documents, they'll have to provide this statement on diversity. And I did run these items by Sharon Connors in purchasing this morning, and she is fine with what's proposed. So we did clear up that hurdle.
Good.
And then the last piece of it, these are some of Sharon's comments, but then the last piece of this was I revised the scoring system. And Stephanie had pointed out correctly that there were some duplicative items in there where they were almost grading them twice on the same thing. So I think I deleted 2 of the criteria that were in there and then just modified the point structure. I think it works a little bit better this way.
Steve, on the 4th item, same thing. Just switch diversification to diversity.
Back to the previous one?
No, where you were. That the 4th one, active participation, diversity.
Okay.
That's it.
Got it. Okay. And one thing that I wanted, it's not related to this, so if this is okay, I'll work with Sharon in purchasing and get this out the door as quickly as possible. The other thing that I'm having conversations with the Corporation Counsel's office, and I wanted to get your take on this, is so, you know, what we typically do with studies is you've appointed like one member of the zoning commission or to serve as your liaison on that particular project. So I believe you've decided that you want this is going to be the whole commission's project and everyone is going to participate. So we'll get, once we get the RFPs back, say there's, you know, 5 or 6 or 7, everybody will have access to those electronically where you can go in and evaluate those. and then we'll probably, say we shortlist it down to 3 we want to interview. The question then becomes, and I was a little concerned about this, is if we're all interviewing the same firms, that's technically a meeting since you're all together as a body.
Well, Steve,
And then I was
why don't
asking
you-
about, does
why
that
don't
have to
you
be
just
public?
establish a subcommittee of 3 members to handle the interviews?
If you wanted to, I think, I'm going to double check with the Corporation Counsel's office as an alternative. I think you could all do that as a meeting and then perhaps do it in an executive session.
Well, if that's permitted, that's a better alternative. But if not, we'll just have a committee of 3.
Okay. Just wanted you to point that out so when we get down the road, in case that issue pops up, at least you can start thinking about it and figure out who's going to possibly jump in if needed.
I have a quick question. Just looking at the point system made me think, in the RFP process, usually, is there a minimum threshold? So what if we receive 5 RFPs and in our opinion, they all score 50? Is there usually a minimum threshold?
Stephanie, they won't.
Okay.
There are always going to be a couple that are just better than the others, and given the specificity of what we're looking for, I think this is going to be even easier. I mean, I have never. I mean, instead of 3 firms, if they're really, really good, we could interview 4. I mean, I've interviewed as many as 8 firms for.
Well, let's avoid that. No.
But I don't think that's going to be the case here.
Okay, fair enough. I was just curious.
I can ask that question though. What happens if basically if everybody comes back? I think under that scenario, everybody's bad if they're not getting like over a certain minimum.
Right.
I hope we have the problem that Lou points to where everybody's really good and we have to, cull some out at the beginning.
I mean, I read through this because I have a lot of experience with it, and this allows us to start the process all over again, to decide not to interview anyone and just go back out and advertise all over.
That makes sense. Thank
I've
you.
had experience with that as well. It's not pleasant.
I'm sure.
Okay, Steve, I don't think we need to vote on this, but I just would like to have a sense that everybody's comfortable with it, and Josh just gave a thumbs up. Stephanie, I assume from your comments, thumbs up.
I think Galen.
Good.
Okay, Galen, Nick, Rod? Okay.
It looks good.
All right. Excuse me. There's one other thing this is very awkward. We just lost an African-American member of our commission. I'm hoping that in November, we're going to lose another. Steve, I'm not sure how to handle this, but I'd like to get the message to the mayor that in filling the current and hopefully the upcoming appointment, that he will recommend people who represent the diversity of the city.
Lou,
I forget women as well. I should have a double.
You're absolutely right.
Lou,
Yep.
I think the mayor is well aware of this. And, Donna King works with a lot of the appointments.
Mhm.
And I know she's well aware of this. But it wouldn't hurt. You could call and speak to her, or
Okay.
call and speak to Harry.
I'll give Donna a call.
Yeah, my involvement on this is usually on the back end.
Right.
Sometimes I don't find out until they're appointed, and I'm like, oh, okay. And very few times have had to do this where I've actually gone to the, powers that be and say, why did you do this to me? But most of the time that's not the case, so.
And I would just add, because I talked with Donna about this a lot in general with all the commissions, she's always trying to source people. So if anyone has recommendations, they should either write to Donna directly or have those people write to Donna. The more names she has, the better.
For what it's worth, I'm seeing Donna tomorrow, so I will mention this to her as well, that we had this conversation too.
We should talk to Dominic, the NOAA women who vote. They may have connections with people who are minorities. And
I actually have already about this commission,
good.
because I'm trying to at least surface names, hopefully, because I'll be leaving you as well.
Right.
No offense, but
that's our hope.
No, we
I've been
want
doing
you,
this
yeah.
all year already to no avail. So I think the more people we have out there surfacing good names, the better.
Yep.
All right, we still have approval of minutes for that July 15th meeting. They went out, I believe, a long time ago.
Yeah.
When we thought we were having the earlier meeting.
So move.
Michael Witherspoon moves. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Okay,
Yeah, really.
Leland seconds. Any comments on the minutes? I have to admit, it's been quite a while since I read them.
I know it's been a long time since.
So if you attended the meeting on the 15th, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions?
I'm abstaining. I could not find them to read them.
Okay. So Nick and Stephanie abstain. Rod, myself, Josh and Galen approve. That's sufficient to move the meeting. Stephen, have I left anything out? I think that covers the agenda.
I think we're good. I did mention there's a possibility you might need to think about an additional meeting. I was looking at what's coming down the pike in terms of stuff that I have. We have 12 commission grade applications in. Some of them you're already looking at, but I'm going to get a very large, very well-known, very controversial application in tomorrow, which will pop up on your September agenda.
Is this
So you'll
someone
have
who
that.
we've already seen before?
Not in a long time,
Oh, okay, okay.
but yeah, you'll maybe figure it out. But that's coming in, and there's a couple other really large applications, and then a couple more a little further down. So, we've dropped some things back into the queue again, so that's just going to add to your time.
Okay. Well, why don't you send out a memo, throw some dates out at us, and see how you'd parse it in terms of when you schedule what. I tell you that personally, my preference is for a written packet rather than accessing materials online, but I understand if it's not always possible to do that.
Yeah, you're going to get a big packet next week.
Okay.
Or this week.
Now that you say that, Lou, is there a way, I find it very, and this is my own personal, I find it very challenging to keep receiving 20 different emails and trying to amass that data for a meeting. Mm-hmm. If you maintain like a Dropbox or something, it's fine if you send it, but somewhere where right before the meeting, we can like access everything in one place would be so helpful. I just throw it out there.
So we're putting everything up on the application page. So we started that now for each application. So that's all there. Do you want something for like meeting specific for that specific meeting? What was distributed for that one meeting?
The application page is on the zoning. I never really realized that was there.
Me either.
I can just tell
I'll
you,
send you out the link tomorrow, and you can tell me if it's helpful.
I print out all of these things and keep it all in a file. I know that that's very wasteful.
I print them out, and then I've got all this massive stuff, you know.
I print them, but
Same here.
it's hard for me to evaluate if I caught all the emails because there's so many. And
Right.
we were in a unique situation where it got postponed, so maybe this meeting was very different. But just trying to figure out, was it Brian who sent it, or Dory, or Steven? I'm searching names.
Right.
It's just,
Yeah.
you know, I get hundreds of emails.
For what it's worth, I found the application page really helpful in prep for this meeting. I stumbled upon it last night. I was like, oh, and I started seeing all the documents were all there.
If
I
everything
totally
is
get what
there,
you're saying.
that's great.
Yeah, I think all the document, and then more stuff was there that I was like trying to think of, like, oh, it would be good if I had that. And I went to the application page. I was like, oh, there it is. I was like, oh, that's great. It just wasn't the first thing I thought of, or really
So, like,
knew that it was fully
when
maintained
people-
in that way.
So when people
Yeah,
send
Steve,
letters-
do you want to share your screen quickly and show the application page? Like, you can show the Merit 7 one. I thought was pretty robust, and some of the other ones were
Agreed.
fairly good.
Yes, let me find it. I think I have it open, actually. I should have it open. Can you see that?
Yeah.
And then if you scroll
Yeah, so
down, you'll
this
start
is
to see.
under, I'll go back to show you where it is. So if you go on the planning and zoning page, on the left, there's applications pending.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
And on the first one, we have, it's just because it's so big, is the North 7. So we have all the materials here for that. I mean, if there's better ways we can organize it, we'll do that. And we probably need to make the nomenclature a little clearer. Here's the Wilson Avenue contractor's yard. So all the items here. One thing we hadn't put up, and I always resisted this in the past, was correspondences, like if a letter of opposition or something. I typically hadn't put that kind of stuff up there. Like if an email comes in from, I just hadn't. I thought about maybe I would put that into a separate folder of just titled correspondences or something like that, but I'm open to suggestions.
Yeah, this is great. The only thing I would say, if it's relevant, if there's a date added, that would be helpful. Like I see staff comments, some have dates, some don't, just so we know.
Yeah.
Sequencing.
Yeah, I was thinking it needed to be more consistent.
Mm-hmm.
I see that our friend is coming back.
Which friend?
25?
Yeah.
I've got a lot of friends, Michael.
I know. You got a lot of friends.
Well, I get to recuse myself, so put it at the end of the beginning, if you can.
Sure. Okay, any more business? If not, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Just before we do that, I
Sure.
just want to quick comment. Nate was an invaluable member of this committee, and I called Nate earlier today and told him what I think is an obvious truth, which is that they are very, very big shoes to fill. And I told him that, and I just wanted to say that even in my very limited time I've been on this commission so far, I have learned a lot from Nate, and his perspective was incredibly valuable. And I learned a lot from him, and I told him that earlier today, and I just thought I should say that to all of you too.
I'm sure he appreciates that.
In the old days, we would take him out for a drink,
Right.
But we can't do that now.
Well,
So
hopefully we can do that.
Good, it would just have to be virtual.
Outdoors. Long.
Virtual, yes. Let's do a virtual goodbye party for Nate. I bet he'd appreciate
Well, hopefully at Christmas time you can socialize again, maybe.
I want to remind you, though, that we don't want Nate to have to buy his own liquor.
There's this wonderful service called Drizzly. It's an app on your phone. You can have alcohol delivered to anyone, anywhere.
Really?
Oh, it's fantastic. It's great for gifts.
Yeah.
It's called
I'm going to send him an app.
Drizzly.
Yeah, it's a thing.
Drizzly.
Yep. So
Or maybe
I just want to. I just felt I should say that. So I'm glad, to Nate.
Okay,
Yes.
again, motion to adjourn.
So move.
Michael, second.
Second.
Stephanie, seconds. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
It's unanimous. Everybody stay well.
Thank
Thank
you.
Take care.